What's up, Inspired Vision, plus anybody I might be catching on YouTube? We are now on day 11 of our Accelerated Algebra 1 course designed to help us prepare for STAAR. Now, we are reviewing all of our days 1 through 10 for this video today. So we are reviewing simplifying expressions with like terms, solving equations involving like terms on both sides of the equation, solving linear equations and equations from 2 points, solving systems, and solving multiple step inequalities. So if I go way too fast during this video and you haven't caught my videos days 1 through 9, please go back and watch those. So as always, it is time to learn some math. Let's tackle that STAAR test. Okay, here's how today's going to work. It's going to be a little bit different. I am going to show 2 or 3 practice questions first. After that, I'm going to show 2 independent practice questions. And then after we do those 2 questions, where hopefully you're pausing the video, you're working them out and getting them right, then we're going to move on to the next 2 concepts where I'm going to show you 2 to 3 questions. Then you do 2 questions, and then we move on to our last concept. All right, now because of how today works, I am not doing any STAAR questions today. The reason why I'm doing this is I noticed that even though this is an accelerated summer school course, that some of my students were struggling in class, and we got to make sure we're good on these topics before we keep going on and learning more topics, because these are what is very important for STAAR. Okay, so here are our first 3 questions. The topics on these questions are combining like terms on number 1 with no equal sign. And then number 2, we do have combining like terms on both sides of the equation. All right, so let's get into it. So the first question, we have parentheses. So we're going to need to distribute the -5 that's in front of this parentheses. And if we distribute the -5 in front of this parentheses times the x, remember there's a 1 in front of that x, so -5 times 1x is -5x. And then -5 times -4 is positive 20. Remember to drop down your 5x that's in the beginning. Now your second set of parentheses, we have -5 times x and -5 times -2. If you multiply those together, you're going to get -5x and positive 10. Now the key here is, the next thing that we do is combine our like terms. Now yesterday we talked about combining like terms on both sides of the equal sign. But today, there's no equal sign. So we're just going to add all of those x's together. So we're going to do 5 minus 5 minus 5. And these x's combine together to be -5x. Now these numbers that do not have an x by them, they're considered like terms too. So we're going to do 20 plus 10 to be 30. Keep in mind here, very important, this is the main reason why I'm doing this today, is there is no equal sign. This is called an expression when there's no equal sign. So all we can do is have this as our answer. We cannot keep going. We cannot solve for x because there's no equal sign. Okay, number 2, however, does have an equal sign. But before we solve using our rectangle triangle, we're going to combine all of the terms on the left-hand side, then all of the terms on the right-hand side before we keep going. So if I combine all the x's on the left-hand side, I'm going to be doing -3 minus 5 plus 4. These combine together to be -4x minus 14. I'm going to drop down my equal sign, and then I'm going to combine the x's on the right-hand side to be -5 minus 1. -5 minus 1 combined together to be -6x minus 18. Now, if you notice, I'm still not ready for my rectangle triangle because I have x's on both sides of the equation now. This is where I can use the term baby to the mama, because we're looking to move the smallest term, that's our baby term, to the bigger term by doing its opposite. So the baby term here is -6x. To move it to the bigger term, we're going to do plus 6x to both sides of the equation, which moves this -6x that's on the right-hand side over to the left-hand side, and now our x is only on the left-hand side. And once we have this as 2x minus 14 equals -18, Now we can use our rectangle triangle. If we're solving for x, so our rectangle goes in front of the x as the 2, triangle is the minus 14, and we always move our triangle first, so we're going to do plus 14 on both sides of the equation. If we do plus 14 with negative 18, those are like terms. We can combine them together to be negative 4. Finally, to finish this question, we're going to move the 2 that's in front of the x by dividing both sides by 2. So negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. All right, that's our answer for that one. Number 3. Number 3 is our good friend, the fraction. So when we solve or when we clear fractions, we have 3 steps. The first step is to put everything in the problem as a fraction, and the second step is to find the LCD. Well, the LCD between 12, 1, and 3 and 12 is 12. So I taught y'all to multiply everything, all the numerators, times 12. If we do that, we keep the same denominator, and then we're going to have negative 24x over 1 plus 12 over 12 plus 48x over 1 minus 12 over 3, and then 84 divided by 12. Now your next step here is to reduce. The way that you reduce is you just divide. So negative 24x divided by 1 is negative 24x. 12 divided by 12 is 1. Then we have 48x. Then we have 12 divided by 3 to be minus 4. And then we have 7. Now, just like the last question, we have like terms here. So start with your x's and notice that your x's are on the same side of the equal sign. So you're just going to add them together. Negative 24 plus 48 gives us positive 24x. Also notice that we have 2 whole numbers on the left-hand side, so we're going to add those together, or in this case subtract, because we're not changing that sign. So 1 plus negative 4, or 1 minus 4, is minus 3. So right now your equation is 24x minus 3 equals 7. Finally, I want to solve for x. So this is where you set up your rectangle and triangle. Rectangle always goes in front of your x, and that is your 24. Minus 3 is your triangle, so I want to add 3 to both sides of the equation. After you do that, you have 24x equals 10. So your last step is to divide by 24, and 10 divided by 24 does reduce. So if you hit math, enter, enter, as you type that in, or know that that both reduces by 2 to be 5 over 12. Okay, so like I said, here's what I want you to do next. I have 2 problems on the screen. I want you to pause the video, work these out, and then replay or play the video when you're ready for me to cover the answers. All right, I'm covering the answers now, so hopefully you have this ready to go. On number 1, you should notice that there's 2 numbers in front of the parentheses, but we're only distributing the one right in front of it, which is negative 1. So I'm going to multiply negative 1 times 2 and negative 1 times x, but I have to drop down the 2 and the minus 3x. I can't forget about those. But negative 1 times 2 is negative 2, and negative 1 times x is negative 1x. So I'm writing this phrase as 2 minus 1x minus 3x. All right, now I have like terms, so I need to combine my like terms by adding them together because they're considered to be on the same side. So negative 1 plus negative 3 is the same thing as negative 1 minus 3, which becomes negative 4x. And when I combine my 2 whole numbers together, it's 2 minus 2, which cancels each other out, so I don't have to write anything. So my final answer for number 1 is B. Number 2, I have a ton of x's. So I need to do the ones on the left-hand side first. And I'm going to add all of these x's together. So negative 5 minus 4 minus 3. Combine all of those together to be negative 12x. And drop down your minus 36. Then I have negative 2 minus 3 on the right-hand side. So negative 2 minus 3 combined together to be negative 5x. Drop down the plus 6. Now, if you still notice, you still have 2 x's in the equation. So this is where you take your baby term to your mama term. Your baby term in this case is negative 12. So if I add 12x on both sides of the equation, I now have the the step to be negative 36 equals 7x plus 6. Okay, now I'm ready for my rectangle triangle to solve for x. So my rectangle is 7, my triangle is plus 6. So I'm going to subtract 6 on both sides to be negative 42, and then divide by 7. So your final answer is negative 6. Hopefully you got these two. Okay, so here's what's next. Our next two concepts is writing equations from a graph and from 2 points. In order to do this correctly, you have to solve for y, because a lot of times this is how your STAAR test likes to have your answers. The tricky thing about number 1 is they only gave me 1 point. If they only give you 1 point, or they don't give you any points at all, you have to rely on the graph. Now I know this is kind of hard to see, but 8, 2 would be right here, and it hits directly through the line. So we have to look for another point where it goes directly through the point, and that is your y-intercept right here. And to write that as a coordinate, it would be 0, 6. So next, you type this into your stat key. Then you do stat calc 4, and here's your equation. But now we have to match which answer choice is this equation. So we can make this fraction into negative 0.5 if we want, and distribute it to the x and to the negative 8, which is going to make the right hand side negative 0.5x plus 4. The left hand side is y minus 2. Now keep in mind we're solving for y here, so your rectangle is the imaginary 1 in front of y. Your triangle is what's most important here, which we have to move it by doing plus 2 on both sides. If we add 2 on both sides, we now have y equals negative 0.5x plus 6. That matches up with what the equation is in our stat key, so we know that A is the right answer. Okay, number 2. Number 2, we're given 2 points. So anytime you have 2 points like this or a table, we're going to type them into our stat key because we want the equation. And if we type them in like this, using L1, L2, stat calc 4, we see the equation 2.25x minus 9. So we have to go through each one of these and solve for y until we see the same thing. So if I start with A, make the triangle 9x, the rectangle plus 4. Always move your triangle first by subtracting 9x. Put these side by side. This is key for this one. Side by side because they're not like terms. Then divide both of them by 4. And we're going to get 9 minus 2.25x, which is almost the answer, not quite. So we have to keep going. So the next one, rectangle is the negative 9 in front of the y because we're solving for y. Triangle is the 4x. Always move the triangle next. This triangle is an understood plus, so minus 4x on both sides. Then put these side by side because they're not like terms. Then divide by negative 9. Now, negative 36 divided by negative 9 is going to turn this into positive, and it's going to become positive 4. And negative 4 divided by negative 9 gives us a decimal that's not easy to convert, so we make it a fraction because it's an ongoing decimal. Okay, so definitely not it. So we're moving on to C. Rectangle and triangle. Rectangle in the negative 4, triangle in the 9x. Subtract 9x on both sides. Put them side by side like this, 36 minus 9x, and divide both by negative 4. Now 36 divided by negative 4 comes out to be negative 9, and negative 9 divided by negative 4 is positive 2.25x. Here's our answer, so we know C is right. Okay, now you're going to do your 2 questions. All right, moving on. Hopefully you've paused the video and have yours worked out. Okay, the number 3, they gave us 1 point as 4, negative 5. That would be right here on the graph. I didn't circle it, but it's right here. We need another point so we can type these into stat. So our other point we can use is the y-intercept because it hits directly on the point, and that is 0, negative 2. Type both those into our stat key, then stat calc 4, and we see that our equation is y equals negative 0.75x minus 2. So now we're going to distribute negative 3/4, which is negative 0.75, to our x and to our negative 5. After we distribute, our negative 0.75 times negative 5 becomes positive 3.75. So since I have y plus 4 on the left-hand side, in order to get y by itself, I need to do minus 4 on both sides of the equation, and then it'll give me the answer, or the equation, as negative 0.75x minus 2.5, which is not what we're looking for. So we're going to go to B. Distribute first. Negative 0.75 times x is negative 0.75x, and negative 0.75 times positive 4 comes out to be negative 3. To move the negative 5 that's on the left-hand side, we're going to add 5 to both sides, and then that becomes plus 2, which is almost my equation. So if I notice, the D is very similar as well, so I went ahead and worked out D. Negative 3/4 is negative 0.75 times x, and negative 0.75 times negative 4 is positive 3. To move them plus 5 on the left-hand side, I'm to subtract 5 on both sides to get negative 0.75x minus 2, which is exactly what I want. Okay, number 4. Number 4, I want to start with stat, type them in, and I get the equation y equals 5x minus 27. I need to distribute on each one and subtract 8 from 35, and I get 5x plus 27, which is not what I'm looking for, but very close. So if I do the same thing on B, I subtract 7 from 40, and I get 5x plus 33. Something very important to note here is, look at what my A is. My A is 5. Notice that each one of these I'm being multiplied by 5 times x. So really all of these have the correct slope. It's just the y-intercept, the B, that we're looking to be negative 27. So here on C, I distribute 5, then add 7 to both sides, and I get 5x minus 33. And finally D, I get 5x minus 35, add 8 to both sides, and I finally have my answer to be 5x minus 27. Hopefully you got that too. Okay, next question. Now we're going into systems and inequalities, where we have variables on both sides. This is what day 9's lesson was about. So with systems, you have to make sure that they're both solved for y. So the first thing I did was subtract 2x on both sides, and then divide by negative 7. And the equation is a little messy, but it did get rid of both the negative signs, because a negative divided by a negative is positive for both of my fractions. Now your next step for systems is to put them into y equals. Again, if you need to know the steps for systems, it's on day 9, where we first solve for y, second put them into y equals, third look at the graph. If only one graph is shown, we cannot use our calculator trick, to do calc 5, enter, enter, enter. So since we can't do that, we're going to have to rely on using our table. And when you're using your table, you need to make sure you look at your answer choices. So this first one's negative 25. So you need to go to negative 25 and see if y1 is negative 2 and y2 is negative 2. On B, it's negative 20. So you have to see if y1 is negative 4 and y2 is negative 4. And if you look at my answer, when I took a screenshot, I saw at negative 40, both y1 and y2 were 6. So that makes C my answer here. Okay, on number 2, my inequality, I need to distribute negative 2 to 3x into positive 4 first, making that negative 6x minus 8. But if you notice, I have x's on both sides of the equal sign. That inequality counts as an equal sign until my last step. So that means I have to take the baby term to my mama term to combine my x's. My smaller x is negative 6. So if I add 6x to both sides of the equation, now my x is going to move over to the right-hand side, and negative 5 plus 6 is 1x. So very important to keep track of what side your x is on when you move your smaller term. All right, now Now I have something I can set up my rectangle and triangle. So I'm going to add 6 next because we always do the opposite of the triangle next. And then we have negative 2 is less than 1x. Now, even if I divide by 1, that doesn't make it flip. What makes my inequality flip, and we talked more about flipping inequalities on day 3 and day 6. But what makes my inequality flip is if I'm dividing by a negative sign or because x is on the right side. And x is on the right side here, so we need to move it to the left side, and our symbol flips to be greater than. So that answer would be B. Okay, so here's your 2 questions. I want you to work these out and see if you can get them right. Okay. On number 5, you solve the second equation for y by subtracting 3x on both sides. Then put these side by side and divide by negative 9. If you divide by negative 9, you're going to get a fraction of negative 7 over 3 plus positive 1 over 3x. Type both of your equations into y equals. After that, look at the graph. This time, we have both graphs shown on the calculator. So since both graphs are shown, we can use our trick of doing calc or second trace 5, enter 3 times. And the calculator will give you the answer of 4, negative 1. So your answer is C. On number 6, we're going to distribute 4 times 5x and 4 times 6 to be 20x plus 24 minus 2 is greater than or equal to 3x plus 2. We want to combine our like terms first on the same side. Now this is kind of weird because the like terms on the same side are actually the numbers, the whole numbers. So 24 minus 2 become 22. Now we want to combine like terms on different sides of the equation. That would be the baby term of 3x, and we're going to move it over to the left-hand side by subtracting 3x on both sides. 20x minus 3x becomes 17x. Bring down the plus 22 and greater than or equal to 2. Now we set up our rectangle and triangle, which means we're going to subtract 22 on both sides first. So 17 is greater than or equal to negative 20, and then we divide by 17. Now on our last step, and since this is our last step, we ask ourselves, do we need to flip that inequality symbol? And in this case, we did not. So our answer is x is greater than or equal to negative 1.176. It keeps going. Or we can turn it into a fraction and be negative 20 over 17. Now, none of my answers say negative 20 over 17. But if you look at C, that's the one that has negative 1. And then, or not C, because it doesn't have the right symbol. But if you look at B, there we go, negative 1 and 3/17. That's the only one that's faced the right way and has negative 1. Or you can think about as 17 times 1 plus 3. That's where they're getting the negative 20 over 17. And B is my right answer. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed today. I hope you got something out of it. And I hope that by not covering new material today, this reinforced all of our concepts that we've learned so far until today. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for tomorrow's lesson.